Hi everyone. Hi, I'm Ellie Sample. I work at the University of Lincoln and I'm your host for tonight for our live lounge. And with me, the most important, most special guest we have ever had, Dame Carol Ann Duffy. Welcome, Carol Ann.
Lovely to be here. I wish I could be in Lincoln itself rather than in my kitchen.
Oh, I do love your kitchen though. The window's amazing. It looks like a cathedral. It looks really brilliant.
Well, although it's the best place for light because it's getting dark now.
Well, you are looking absolutely fabulous. You do look amazing. I don't know how you do it at this time of the day. You look really good. So thank you.
I've got pajama bottoms on underneath.
At least you've got something on, which is good. So thank you. Talking of cathedrals, I've got the amazing Lincoln Cathedral behind me.
Oh, I think. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it is beautiful here in Lincoln. And
one of my favourite cathedrals.
It is. You've done a lot of visiting of cathedrals around the country, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm writing a poem for every English cathedral. So I've kind of lost pretty much all of this year doing that. So I'll have to get on the case next year.
You are incredibly busy though, as usual, and I understand you've got a new anthology coming out soon, Carol Ann.
Yes, in February, with Picador, I have an anthology called Empty Nest, which is poems for when children leave home. So it's both for parents and families and young people themselves looking at that experience from different angles. So we have everyone from Shakespeare to Alice Oswald to Heaney to Tennyson, lots of different voices.
And in there, I know those are some of your favourite authors because you told us that when you were with us at the weekend. And Shakespeare and Alice Oswald, I know, are sort of icons of yours, which is really interesting.
Well, I wouldn't call Alice Oswald an icon, but she's one of my favourite contemporary poets. Shakespeare, certainly.
No, that's brilliant. And children leaving home, young people leaving home is probably really relevant because obviously lots of young people watching us tonight are going to be thinking about going to university in the future. And Carol Ann, you're one of our visiting artists here at the University of Lincoln, which is why you're kindly doing this live lounge with us. And I know tonight we're going to focus on the world's wife. And I'd like to say a massive hello to everyone watching. Vivian, I can see you've already put a comment up. So hello, Vivian. Thanks for joining us. If you are watching, please do type in a comment, say hello, tell us where you're watching, tell us where you are. And please do ask any questions or any requests that you have from Dame Carol Ann, who's going to be reading some of her poems for us and telling us a little bit about them. And it's a really amazing opportunity. I can't tell you how exciting it is to have a previous poet laureate. And if you imagine what it would be like to have Wordsworth or Tennyson or any of the many laureates, Dryden, Ted Hughes with us, and you could ask them anything. And you've actually got a real life previous poet laureate. So when you write your A-level answer, you can say, when I asked the poet laureate this question, she told me whatever she says. So hello, Alicia. That's really lovely to see you. Thank you. And we look forward to having some more questions from you. So Carol Ann, without further ado, would you like to start with a poem?
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, I've been asked to concentrate on poems from the world's wife in this session. So I thought, given we've mentioned Shakespeare, I'd start with a poem called Anne Hathaway. And Anne, of course, was Shakespeare's wife, then widow. She was older than Shakespeare by around 7 years, and they got married when Shakespeare was only 18. I think she was probably pregnant, so it was a sort of shotgun marriage. And in Shakespeare's day, it was very unusual for men to marry as teenagers. They would commonly be a lot older than that. So they married, they lived in Stratford, They had 3 children, but of course Shakespeare left Stratford, lived in London, and that's where he established himself as a great writer, but also the owner of many theatres. So he became quite wealthy during the course of his life. And in his will, when they opened it up, they discovered that he hadn't left anything to Anne, apart from an old piece of furniture, which he described in the will as his second best bed. And I wrote this poem, a sonnet, as a nod to Shakespeare, when I read that many scholars had felt that he'd only left her his old bed in the will because he wanted to offend her, to hurt her feelings, to pretty much display that he had no affection for her. And I found myself unable to agree with this, because the Shakespeare I find in his plays and in his poetry is not a mean-spirited or spiteful character. It's a very generous, inventive, playful, sexy, funny personality. So I decided that the second best bed could have been their first bed when they were young, and he was leaving it to her as a kind of private symbol or even a private joke between them. So Anne is speaking in this poem. Anne Hathaway. The bed we loved in was a spinning world of forests, castles, torchlight, cliff tops, seas where he would dive for pearls. My lover's words were shooting stars, which fell to earth as kisses on these lips. My body now a softer rhyme to his, now echo, assonance, his touch a verb dancing in the center of a noun. Some nights I dreamed he'd written me, the bed a page beneath his writer's hands, romance and drama played by touch, by scent, by taste. In the other bed, the best, our guests dozed on, dribbling their prose. My living, laughing love, I hold him in the casket of my widow's head, as he held me upon that next best bed.
What a beautiful poem, and what a beautiful sentiment. And what made, well, you've told us what made you write that, but where did you find that inspiration, Carol Ann?
I think often it's quite lazy the way history is recorded, and I wanted Anne Hathaway's voice to kind of speak with her own version of what might have been the case. And the War's Wife itself is a collection of poems written in different female voices from history or mythology or fairy tale or the Bible or the movies. So it's a kind of range of characters that I suppose I grew up with, really, either from my childhood or my school days, my reading. And I wanted not only to celebrate these characters, but see if I could find something fresh from their perspectives to add to what was very familiar. And also sometimes to use these personae to write about myself in a way. So a bit like putting a mask on. But it's me speaking behind the mask. So that's also a love poem, which could be autobiographical, but I'm using Anne Hathaway's story.
And I think that it really comes across. Now we have to say a quick hello. Hello to Sophie Harrison. Really nice to meet you. There's Florence. Florence is an aspiring poet and an A-level literature student, and she's from North Yorkshire.
Hello, Florence.
We've got Jack here and Josh as well, who's watching from Guildford and really excited to get into some poetry. Liam says he prefers Wilfred Owen, and what I say to you, Liam, is watch and learn.
Well, no, I mean, I prefer Wilfred Owen. Much. Good choice, Liam.
And Alicia says, she's got a question. She says, do you know any links between the feminine Gospels and A Streetcar Named Desire?
Oh, God.
That's quite a hard one. We should write an essay on that one, Carol Ann.
Yeah, no, I don't really.
No.
I think I saw that movie maybe 40 years ago. I haven't watched it for a long time.
I have a feeling there was an awful remake with the chap from Miami Vice, and it was very poor. So, yeah, probably not. So, oh, here we are. Here's a really good question. Hello, Grace. And Alexandra, I'm going to take Alexandra's question. Which female from the World's Wife collection fascinated you or inspired you the most?
Oh, that's such a difficult question. Well, the first one I ever wrote was Mrs. Midas. And I think that was probably because from my school days, I loved that story, which is originally from Ovid, where Midas is granted a wish, and he asks that everything he touches turns to gold. So I love that story as a young school person, but it also slightly horrified me. I remember he was hungry and he picked up a loaf of bread and it was gold and he couldn't eat it. So it was kind of be careful what you wish for. So Mrs. Midas was the first one I wrote. I'm very fond of that one. There's so many. I don't think I have a favourite, really. It'd be difficult to choose a favourite.
I suppose the question is, do you have a favourite, Alexandra? And is that a good time to go into another poem, Carol Ann?
Yeah. I'll read, some of them are very long, these poems, because they're like stories. So I thought I'd start off with shorter ones. So this is Mrs. Esop. And again, this comes from my school days, from the books we read at school. And Aesop's Fables was one of the books we had to read a lot of. And I suppose I would have been in about year 6 when I seemed to be having an Aesop's fable read to me every day at the end of school, sitting on the carpet. And like most children, I loved stories with animals in. But I always felt oddly disappointed by these fables. And I think looking back, it was because of the moral that was tacked onto the end of the story. So you had to kind of understand the point of it, and I often didn't. So as an adult writer, I was very interested in Aesop and in the amount of cliche that he left behind. So as you'll hear when I read the poem, a lot of the things that he wrote, we still say. A stitch in time saves 9, that kind of thing. And I tried to research him. I found that although he was a slave, he was very famous for his fables. And he was also rather unkindly picked on because he was tiny. So this was the only autobiographical material I could find. And I began to reread the fables, but there were well over 300 of them. So I've used some of them in this poem, as you'll hear. And it's Mrs. Esop who's talking in the poem. By Christ, he could bawl for purgatory. He was small, didn't prepossess, so he tried to impress. Dead men, Mrs. Esop, he'd say, tell no tales. Well, Let me tell you now that that bird in his hand shat on his sleeve. Never mind the two worth less in the bush. Tedious. Going out was worst. He'd stand at our gate, look, then leap. Scour the hedgerows for a shy mouse, the fields for a sly fox, the sky for one particular swallow that couldn't make a summer. The jackdaw, according to him, envied the eagle. Donkeys would, on the whole, prefer to be lions. On one appalling evening stroll, we passed an old hare snoozing in a ditch. He stopped and made a note. And then, about a mile further on, a tortoise, somebody's pet, creeping slow as marriage up the road. Slow but certain Mrs. Esop wins the race. Asshole. What race? What sour grapes? What silk purse, sow's ear, dog in a manger? What big fish? Some days I could barely keep awake as the story droned on towards the moral of itself. Action, Mrs. A, speaks louder than words. And that's another thing. The sex was diabolical. I gave him a fable one night about a little cock that wouldn't crow, a razor-sharp axe with a heart blacker than that pot that called the kettle. I'll cut off your tail all right, says I, to save my face. That shut him up. I laughed last, longest.
That is brilliant. That is so brilliant. We've got so many comments. I'm going to quickly whiz through all the people who have come on. Alexandra's come back to say her favourite is Havisham, and she's just taught it for her Year 9 class, and they loved it. So hello to your Year 9 class. Lots of people are asking if this is recorded, and yes, it is. It's on the Live Lounge for probably a month. There's quite a few people to say hi to. So Emma Crutchley, Hannah Crawford, who's an aspiring novelist, and she's studying these poems at the moment. Marcus from Edinburgh loved your poems, and especially War Photographer. And Marcus says, do you have any tips for a young aspiring poet?
I think the most important thing if you want to write poetry is that you have to read it. And that would be the case for everything you wanted to do. If you want to play football, you need to watch games and learn how it's done. So this also goes for poetry, that the more you read, the more different poets you read, the more you'll kind of absorb things like form, technique, ideas of using language, and you sort of build up a toolkit of approaches to poetry that you can use in your own writing. So read is the biggest tip that I've got for aspiring young poets.
Yeah, I have to admit, I've been lucky enough to sit in one of your teaching sessions, and even I wrote a good poem there. It was absolutely amazing and very inspirational. We've got Yushray watching, Sophie, Megan, loved War Photographer. Now, you asked what inspired Carol Ann to write that, and I'd ask you to go and watch the session on the virtual open day from last Saturday, where we did talk about War Photographer, didn't we, Carol Ann?
Yeah, I read it. I can read it again if you want it in this session. I'm happy to do that.
Well, we've got lots of other questions,
Okay.
Cara, and she can go back and watch that if you don't mind. But
no,
Cara's asking about Medusa and Demeter, her favourites, and she wonders where you got the inspiration for them.
Okay. Well, why don't I read Medusa then and maybe talk about that. So again, this is another character from Greek mythology, and Medusa was a gorgon, and she had probably a bit like my hair looks at the moment, actually, after 9 months without a hairdresser. She had real snakes for hair. And the big thing about Medusa was that you must not look at her, because if she looked at you, you would turn to stone. So a terrifying mythological creature. So in my poem Medusa, I'm using the character to explore the kind of jealousy that completely ruins your life, ruins your relationship, ruins your psyche, your spirit, your sense of yourself, and turns everything good in the world to stone, really. And it was quite fun to do this, because it's not autobiographical in that I haven't got that kind of extreme personality, but the poem and the character allowed me to imagine what it might be like to be consumed and have your life ruined by jealousy. Medusa. A suspicion, a doubt, a jealousy grew in my mind, which turned the hairs on my head to filthy snakes, as though my thoughts hissed and spat on my scalp. My bride's breath soured, stank in the grey bags of my lungs. I'm foul-mouthed now, foul-tongued, yellow-fanged. There are bullet tears in my eyes. Are you terrified? Be terrified. It's you I love, perfect man, Greek god, my own. But I know you'll go, betray me, stray from home. So better by far for me if you were stone. I glanced at a buzzing bee. A dull grey pebble fell to the ground. I glanced at a singing bird. A handful of dusty gravel spattered down. I looked at a ginger cat. A house brick shattered a bowl of milk. I looked at a snuffling pig. A boulder rolled in a heap of shit. I stared in the mirror. Love gone bad showed me a gorgon. I stared at a dragon. Fire spewed from the mouth of a mountain. And here you come, with a shield for a heart, and a sword for a tongue, and your girls. Wasn't I beautiful? Wasn't I fragrant and young? Look at me now.
That's very powerful. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, as I say, I'm using, again, a character from Greek mythology that sort of fascinated me from when I suppose I was about 14 or 15. The description of her with poisonous snakes for hair, sort of hissing and moving on her scalp was, very disturbing. And then the idea that if you looked at her, you would turn to stone. So you couldn't even kind of be appalled and fascinated at looking at these snakes because you would die. And it just came into my mind that it was kind of quite a poisonous character and a very disturbed creature, this Gorgon Medusa. And the emotion of poisonous jealousy and that kind of destructive and self-destructive emotion seemed to fit. So I used the character to write about the emotion and put them together.
No, I think, and you say a lot of your poems are autobiographical, but I know that you're definitely not a kind of jealous kind of angry person. In fact, you're totally the opposite of that. So is there any element of that that's autobiographical, or
No,
is
I
it?
mean, I think what's great about that kind of a poem, it's a bit like fancy dress. You can put on a costume and a mask and a different persona and allow your imagination to go to places that your life and your experience wouldn't take you. So that very liberating in that sense to allow yourself to be a bad girl.
No, we've got two relevant, really good questions actually. One from Amber Hassan, who says, "Hi, in an interview, Carol Ann, you mentioned that your poetry has the ability to make something happen. How can people," she said, "use your poetry, but I think use any poetry to make something happen?"
Did I say that in an interview? I
It was
think
probably
I was probably trapped in an interview where someone misquoted that remark of Auden's, "Poetry makes nothing happen." So maybe it was a response to that. For me, the happening that is caused by poetry tends to be a private, personal moment, perhaps seeing the world captured in language for you by a poet can be very important. Finding a poem that speaks to you is often, very comforting. We use poems at funerals, or we'll use them to celebrate at weddings or civil partnerships, or when babies are born. So poetry, I think, is the music of being human. So what it makes happen is perhaps a moment of recognition, or a way of explaining the world that language can do. I don't think it makes anything happen in that, I could turn up outside the White House, read a poem, and Trump would concede. If it could make that happen, I'd be there.
See, I'm not so sure actually, Carol Ann, because your poems about bees, ever since that actually changed our whole culture and society. And a lot of people probably won't attribute the current sort of obsession with bees and awareness of the importance of bees. But for me, that all came from your original poem.
Well, I would have to disagree with that. I think the poems in the bees reflected what was going on in climate areas and environmental concerns. So I was of my time in those poems, but I'm very, very far from being responsible for an awareness of that. You're too kind, Ellie.
No, I don't think I am. And I think it's very worth you considering or rethinking your poetry about Mr. Trump. And maybe that could make a big difference.
I wish.
I know that was now. Oh, there was another good question from Chelsea Bradburn. This is a bit of a difficult one, so you might want to think about this one. But has a poem ever humbled or frightened you? And if so, which one and why?
I don't think I've ever been frightened by a poem, unless it's, one of mine that is so bad that I'm embarrassed to have written it. But yeah, many poems have humbled me. The great poets that one first encounters, perhaps at school or university, that stay with you all your life are humbling. The poems of Keats, or Yeats, or Hopkins, or Dylan Thomas, Shakespeare, those were poems that were important to me as a teenager. and continue to be.
Some people watching might not know about your book, Fairy Tales, which the first story in that I think is terrifying, the one about the princess.
Which is the first story in that?
Oh gosh, it's the one about the princess. It's a completely original story that you wrote, and I think it's called The Blue Something. And she has to marry the prince, and he locks her in a room. And
no, that's yeah. The fairy tales I wrote are retellings.
I'd never come across that one before.
Bluebeard, you have.
Bluebeard, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very old fairy tale.
Oh, it was very scary.
No, I didn't know Bluebeard. I wish. So I've retold many of the stories from Grimm's fairy tales, which is one of my all-time favorite books. And I put a few original fairy tales of my own in, but the bulk of it is retellings of Grimm, and Bluebeard is a very, very ancient fairy tale.
It is very scary, though.
It's terrifying, isn't it? She goes into the room and all his murdered wives are there. Horrible.
It is awful, although we've just spoiled the end. That's a spoiler alert if you haven't read it.
The princess wins through in the end. So it has,
yeah, don't worry.
Yeah.
Now, there's another good question from Eleanor Maslin, who she writes for the student newspaper, and she says, what is it you love about Lincoln, and what advice would you give to students seeking to reach their goals?
Oh, I like lots of things about Lincoln. Well, the cathedral, I love. It's up there in my top 6 of English cathedrals. I also like, I don't know what the area is called, but that street that has that pie shop.
Oh, Brown's Pie Shop.
Yeah.
The Bale, up at the Bale.
Yeah.
The Bale Gate.
It's a street that goes down the hill, and it's got lots of lovely little antique.
Oh, steep hill.
Yeah. I love round there. And
you quite like the Hilton as well, in the cocktail bar. We've been had maybe.
I was trying to be respectable. I love that pie shop there, because you can get really good pies and a glass of beer, and it's all cozy. You know, it's the kind of place you can go on your own and read a book and stuff your face with a pie. And it's a very friendly. Well, it's a city really, but I grew up in a small market town called Stafford, and Lincoln has that feel that people know each other, and it's got a kind of markety feel to it that I like. And I like towns with cathedrals in them very much.
And what advice would you give to students seeking to reach their goals? So what do you wish you'd known at 18?
I don't know. I would give advice. I think it's very important to say yes to everything. I think yes is like opening a door. Something will happen on the other side of yes. So experience as many things as you can, you know, join clubs, go and see things, meet people, find out who you are. I wouldn't worry so much about the work, because I think that will come anyway. And I did no work till the 3rd year really. But the work will happen. But I think finding out who you are and making friendships and developing interests is very important.
And Eleanor says, does she have your permission to put your answers in her article?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, we'll say a quick hello to Hayley, Ellie, Hannah, who loves your work, Hannah Crawford, Rebecca. Hannah says you're a queen. Feminine Beauty. A really good question from Johnny Cat Biscuit. Do you have a favourite football team?
Oh, yes. Liverpool. I have a poem called Liverpool, which I could read if you'd like.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Well, we were just talking about university, and I went to university in Liverpool. So I used to go to Anfield for the home games. This was in the days of Bill Shankly and Bob Paisley managing. And I happened, rather sadly, to be in Liverpool when the Hillsborough disaster happened. And 25 years after that, when the families of the victims finally achieved justice, I wrote this poem, Liverpool. The cathedral bell tolled, could never tell, nor the liver birds mute in their stern spell, or the Mersey, those seagulls wailed, cursed overhead, in no language for the slandered dead. Not the raw red throat of the cop keening, or the cop's words censored of meaning. Not the clock, slow hand clapping the coroner's deadline, or the memo to Thatcher, or the tabloid headline. But fathers told of their daughters. The names of sons on the lips of their mothers were prayers, lost ones honoured for bitter years by orphan, cousin, wife. Not a matter of football, but of life. Over this great city, light after long dark, and truth, the sweet silver song of a lark.
Thank you, Carol Ann. There's so much in there. I don't know if you can give any context for some of our younger viewers, maybe.
Well, Hillsborough was a disaster at a football game where 96 people died, many of them very young football fans. And it took 25 years for the families of the dead to get a fair verdict about what had happened on that day. And it was a very stressful and very long drawn out course of a century for the families. So the poem is remembering those who died and the families who fought and lasted all that time to get a just verdict for what had happened.
And I think I don't know how you go about approaching such a challenging subject. How did you approach it? How did that poem sort of grow in your head?
It kind of insisted on being written, I think, because I love Liverpool so much. As I said, I lived there for 10 years. I was at university there. I had been to, so many football matches at Anfield. So I felt like so many people terribly upset and traumatized really by what had happened. So it was one of those poems that had to be written really. I didn't have to approach it or think about it. It came from a place of deep feeling really.
And I think that leads us on to another question. There's two lovely questions here. One from Kennedy Wilson Park, who's teaching the feminine gospels to her A-level students. And she says, what was your main aim with that anthology? So I'll give you that one before I go on to the next one, actually.
Yeah, it's difficult to answer these questions because with a collection, it's kind of a journey writing poetry. So I don't think any poet sort of sits down with an aim or sits down knowing what their destination is going to be. It perhaps reveals itself as you begin to write it. So if a book of poetry takes a couple of years to write, it would only be some 2/3 of the way through that one became aware of what you're actually doing. So I think I wanted to look at different ways of being female, being a woman, being me, and imagining what it would be like if I was hugely tall or hugely loud, or if I was history, or if I was able to be a kind of presence in history. So it was my imagination playing around with that kind of idea. And then I think a bit of the way into it, I decided I wanted to make use of everything that I'd learnt in school. So there's a very long poem in it called The Laughter of Stafford Girls High, which is a celebration of and a subversion of the kind of girls' schools that I went to and what we learnt there and how useful or useless it was. And yeah, so it was a kind of exploration of what's possible and what isn't possible, I suppose.
No, I think that's beautiful. I think it moving on a little bit in terms of one of the things that I think is very true in society now is it's quite hard to be a young person, especially during lockdown. And I think especially with, you know, facing everything that's happening with coronavirus and Brexit and all these things and Trump and so different to when we were young, really, Carol Ann. What advice would you give to anyone? Who's young now and starting out and thinking about sort of a career in literature? Or what advice would you give?
So can you do you mean during lockdown or
No, more generally, what I mean is that I don't know. I think when we were young, there seemed to be lots of opportunities. You could, you know, the way you think, I think you see the world in a multiplicity of different ways. And at the moment, I think for young people, they don't always have the opportunity to see the world in that way. There seems to be a lot of negativity around, and it's kind of like, what advice would you give young people generally, but also anyone considering sort of going into a creative future, sort of who wants, lots of the people who are writing questions want to be authors or poets or have a great love of literature. So I've made the question even more.
I mean, I think obviously these are very difficult times, you know, because of what we're doing to the climate, and you know that this lockdown is a direct result, I think, of what we've done to the climate. So the challenges for young people are kind of quite extreme. Creativity, though, is the way forward, whether it's creativity in the arts or creativity in science, creativity in how we order ourselves as societies. So if you want to write, as I said earlier, read, find like-minded people, join writers' workshops, go to events, send your poems off to magazines, start your own magazine. Start an online magazine. Just go for it and engage as much as you can with reading and writing and communicating with each other.
I think that is such a good answer to such a bad question. I'm going to ask you, because I know you've got a record coming out for Christmas called Snow Angel. So I'm going to ask you, what's your favourite record and what inspired you to bring out a record?
So, well, Snow Angel is being brought out by the singer-songwriter Catherine Williams, who was shortlisted for the Mercury Prize a few years ago. She's wonderful, and she's done loads of albums. So I've done the lyrics for that, and Catherine will be releasing it, I think, digitally in time for Christmas, Snow Angel. What's my favourite record? Oh gosh, I've got so many. You ask such hard questions. Well, I quite like rock and roll. So if I was looking for something to get up and dance to, I might go for something like Lordy Miss Claudie by Elvis. And then I love Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen, Van Morrison, Beatles, Simon Garfunkel. So I'm kind of quite 70s, really. I think the music we love tends to be the music we fall in love with as teenagers. So I'm pretty 70s, really. T-Rex I like, they're good to boogie.
They are, that's a good point. And do we have time for one more question or one more poem, Carol Ann?
Whichever you want.
I think I'd probably go for a poem, probably, because I do love a poem.
Well, perhaps I could read one from my new book, Sincerity.
Yeah.
Which people might not know as well. And what should we pick? Oh yeah, well, we were talking about Trump earlier, so let's read this one and see if sometime later tonight this poem's gone out into the universe and Trump concedes, and then we'll know that poetry does make something happen. So it's a true story that happened to me when I was at the zoo in Berlin, and I came face to face with a huge gorilla. It was at Berlin Zoo, don't ask, where I came face to thick glass with a gorilla. We stared each other out. Its eyes were smashed rage under a pelmet of wrath. Its nose, 2 boxing gloves. Its mouth, an unliftable curse. I wished it were free. Down on the equatorial belt, chilling to Morrissey. With a day's more evolution, it could even be president.
Oh, Carol Ann, I could talk to you all night, but it really wouldn't be fair. There is a really good question. Do you fancy another question? I mean, there are lots and lots of questions, but there's one from someone called Stories and Sun, and she says, or he says, sorry, are there any poems where you've really disagreed with how readers have perceived or analysed your writing? Oh, from Neve.
Hi, Neve. No, I would never do that, because I think once a poem is written and published and goes out into the world, it has its own life, and very, very often the poet's dead anyway. So if we're studying, poets early 20th century and backwards, the poet isn't there to answer these questions. So I think the first relationship a poem has is with the poet. It's a very intense relationship when you're writing the poem. And then the next relationship the poem has is with the reader. So a good poem needs a good reader, and I think the ownership is equal. So anything a good reader has to say about a poem I've written is as valid as anything I could say as the author of it. That's what I think.
I think that's really true, and I hope that answers the question. Now, have you got time for a couple more questions, or is it time? Oh, a couple more questions. Oh, we're very lucky. There are lots here. Lots of people are still watching and sending in questions. So, Max Chambers says, which poem was your favourite within the Rapture, your book published in 2005?
Rapture. Which is my favourite in Rapture?
That's quite a question. That's quite a long time ago, isn't it? It's 15 years.
Is it that long?
God.
So Rapture is a book of 52 love poems, looking at a relationship through all its events. I'm just flicking through it here. There's one I like called New Year, and the reason I like that is because of the way the poem deals with time. The idea that although a time might pass, it's still always there. So I quite like what I'm doing with thinking about time in that poem. So it's called New Year. I'll pick that one, but more because of what it's trying to write about than anything else.
Max, go and revisit that. Or do you have a favourite poem in Rapture, Max? That would be good to know. And Alexandra Catherine says, I teach Valentine every year as an English teacher. How do you feel that Valentine, for a lot of students, is their first encounter with your poetry?
Well, how do I feel? Guilty? I don't know. Culpable? I think Valentine's a very accessible poem. It's simply about giving an onion as a Valentine's gift. The thinking behind that is onions are very lovely. They're like little moons, but like love, they can also make us cry. So I think it's probably accessible and quirky enough to be a reasonable first encounter with my poetry for teenagers.
Yeah, it's very popular. Whenever you visit us here in Lincoln, it's always one that everybody asks for. It's a really, really popular poem, that one.
It's a very simple poem. Not a lot happening in it.
But quite erotic, well, as I insist, it's erotic. You were quite shocked when I said that, but no.
You should go away and read Bluebeard and educate yourself about the origins of fairy tales.
I know. Do you know the worst thing? I do actually own the original Grimm brothers stories, but they're quite hard to read, the originals.
I'm not sure if Bluebeard was Grimm, though. It might have been another source. I'll have to check that.
I don't think it is Grimm. I think I would have known it if it
might
was
be
Grimm.
French.
Oh, I didn't. Yeah, I genuinely thought it was yours.
Yeah, I think it's an old French fairy tale, Bluebeard. I should know, but I've forgotten.
Oh, there's a lovely comment from Josie Pedersen, who says, thank you so much for sharing your time and thoughts with us. You were very giving and very funny.
Thank you. I'll do with that. I'll settle for that.
Yeah, I think being funny is good. There's a question about your Meantime collection from Tia Smith. She says, what is your favourite poem in your Meantime collection?
Lordy, hang on, let's have a look.
While you're looking, I'm going to tell you that Imogen B says Carol Ann is so funny.
Thank you.
I think that's a really good thing. I think bringing joy to the world is a good thing, though, Carol Ann.
Joy to the world.
It's nearly Christmas. Oh, what are you doing for Christmas?
Hang on, I'm currently trying to choose my favourite poem in the meantime.
I know.
I'll have to say prayer, I think, the last one.
That's not what you're doing for Christmas.
No. Christmas at home, as always. Hopefully, I'll be able to have my daughter here if all this lockdown, tears, whatever is kind of sorted out in some way or another. But I think I've decided, I was reading an article in The Guardian yesterday about someone saying that she'd put her Christmas tree up already to cheer her up. And I thought, I might do that. So I might put my Christmas tree up at the weekend and then have, roughly 2 months of sparkling lights. Given that I'm unlikely to be able to travel anywhere till at least March, I might do that. I haven't quite decided yet. But
I think that's brilliant.
I'm going that way.
I'm thinking we purchased a new Christmas tree the weekend, and it comes pre-lit with fir cones on it, and I'm very tempted to put it up. And lots of people are. It's becoming a bit of a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I might do that. I'm going that way.
It's
get the sherry out.
Mulled wine.
Put music on loud. Put the tree up.
Oh God, yeah.
Put It's a Wonderful Life on.
Oh gosh, yeah, and the snowman. I love the snowman.
Yeah, I like It's a Wonderful Life. James Stewart.
That's your favourite Christmas film?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It is beautiful. I love James Stewart, but I prefer him in Harvey.
Oh, the rabbit.
I love the rabbit. The puka. He's a puka. But It's a Wonderful Life is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the snowman.
Every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. I start crying.
It's true. It's you do just weep through it, really.
I start weeping at the credits.
That's when you know you're going to have a good night, though, isn't it? That's when you get a bottle of wine, good film, credits, forget putting the tree up.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's been lovely talking to you. Good luck with your exams and your poems and your lockdown, and all things must pass. We'll get through this and be different this time next year, I think.
Lots of love and Christmas wishes to Carol Ann.
Lots of love. Bye, everyone.